Good morning. This is the Adult Sunday School lesson from Mount Vernon Baptist Church for March 14th. Our prayer request today actually contains some joy. We are seeing the virus cases falling strongly. We're much joyful for that. Answered prayers for sure. Let's not be weary in well-doing, however, and let's remain strong in the prayers that we send upward for those who fight this virus and those who are actually battling it inside their bodies. Now today we begin looking at Matthew chapter 2, which is our second stop on our study journey through the gospel. And we need to remember something clearly today, and that is that as we proceeded this time of study in the book of Genesis, all those many chapters we viewed on a historical and on a type and shadows perspective. We were looking at all those studies looking forward. Now, we're in the gospel. And what are we looking at this time? We are looking everything that we study as a kingdom perspective. For those of you who read ahead into our study book, you see that most of our lessons this term all have some semblance of Jesus as a king in their title. Our application today is that the student will be wise enough to recognize that Jesus is king in his life. Now, as we look at our verses today, let's remember that the plan of God continues to unfold. We'll see that several times today. Today in chapter 2, the book of Matthew, let's look starting together at verse 1. Now when Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, behold, there came wise men from the east to Jerusalem, saying, Where is he that is born of the King of the Jews? For we've seen his star in the east and are come to worship him. When Herod heard these things, he was troubled, and all the people in Jerusalem with him. When he had gathered all the chief priests and the scribes of the people together, he demanded of them where Christ should be born. And they said unto him, In Bethlehem of Judea, for thus it is written by the prophet, And thou, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, art not the least among the princes of Judah, for out of thee shall come a governor that shall rule my people Israel. Micah 5:2. And Herod, when he had privily called these wise men, inquired of them diligently what time the star had appeared. And he sent them to Bethlehem and said, Go and search diligently for the young child. When you found him, bring me word again, that I may come and worship him also. When they had heard the king, they departed, and lo, the star which they saw in the east went before them, until it came and stood over where the young child was. And when they saw the star, they rejoiced with exceeding great joy. And when they were come into the house, they saw the young child with Mary his mother, and fell down and worshipped him. And when they had opened their treasures, they presented unto him gifts, gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And being warned of God in a dream that they should not return to Herod, they departed into their own country another way. And when they were departed, behold, the angel of the Lord appeareth to Joseph in a dream, saying, Arise, take the young child and his mother, flee into Egypt, and be thou there until I bring thee word, for Herod will seek the young child to destroy him. When he arose, he took the young child and his mother by night and departed into Egypt, and was there until the death of Herod, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken of by the Lord through his prophet, Out of Egypt I have called my son. Hosea 11:1. Then Herod, when he saw that he was mocked by the wise men, was exceeding wroth. And he sent forth and slew all the children that were in Bethlehem, and in all the coast thereof, and from 2 years old and under, according to the time which he had diligently inquired of the wise men. Then was fulfilled that which was spoken by Jeremiah the prophet. In Ramah there a voice heard, lamentation, weeping, great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children, and would not be comforted. Jeremiah 31:15. But when Herod was dead, behold, an angel of the Lord appeareth in a dream to Joseph in Egypt, saying, Arise, take the young child and his mother, go into the land of Israel, for they are dead which sought the young child's life. And he arose and took the young child and his mother, and came into the land of Israel. But when he heard that Archelaus did reign in Judea in the room of his father Herod, he was afraid to go there. Notwithstanding, being warned of God in a dream, he turned aside into the parts of Galilee. And he came and dwelt in a city of Nazareth, that it might be fulfilled which was spoken by the prophets, He shall be called a Nazarene. Isaiah 11:1. Now here, in our second stop of our study journey in the Gospel of Matthew, we will see how a simple question brings many consequences, some of which are horrible. We will see a troubled king in fear of an infant. We will see the divine protection placed by the Lord over the Christ child, as well as those who came from far away to see and worship him. Before we view our study verses, we remember last week that we saw what turmoil was inside the heart of Joseph when he heard that Mary was pregnant. He had been in despair and turmoil that the woman he loved admitted that she was with child, and that she said that she had not been unfaithful, but rather had been chosen by God to bear his son, the Messiah. Joseph first reacted in his human side. He wanted to put her away in private. But a dream vision was given to him from God, assuring him that Mary was telling the truth. From that moment forward, Joseph served God by marrying Mary and protecting her in every way necessary. Now the child had been born in Bethlehem, and we see a most prophetic moment. The Gospel of Matthew was directed to Jews and Jewish Christians. But the first ones, after the shepherds visited, that sought the newborn king, were a group of Gentile wise men from a distant land. The Bible does not call these wise men kings, nor does it teach in the Bible that there were three of them. Those thoughts came later from man and not from Scripture. These wise men had followed a special star of great light to find the child. They came and asked of the court of King Herod a very simple question. They did not ask if a king had been born, but rather where was the king that had arrived. All who lived there and knew Herod were greatly afraid of his reaction to that simple question. He was always suspicious of anyone who may threaten his throne. In 7 BC, he had murdered 2 of his own sons for threatening his throne, and in 4 BC, he murdered a 3rd son for the same reason. He also had continually executed Pharisees who were disloyal and questioned his authority. Herod put the question asked by the wise men to the Jewish Sanhedrin, the religious court of the Jewish people, and they gave Herod a clear answer based upon Jewish scripture, that the Messiah king was foretold to be born in Bethlehem. Now we must note that even though they knew these things, they showed no interest whatsoever in finding the child themselves, who had fulfilled their own scripture. The only ones interested seemed to be the wise men and Herod. The wise men had traveled far and with great zeal to find the new king, while the Jews themselves showed little care. This paradox that we see here will fill the Gospel of Matthew. We'll see many times the disinterest of the Jewish leaders in the Messiah that had been sent. Prophets such as Isaiah had provided much information about the coming of the Messiah, but we see that only Micah revealed the city where Jesus would be born. Herod interrogated these wise men closely to learn their plans, and he deceived them by telling them to return to him the location so that he himself might worship the newborn king. Herod was already making his plans to destroy the child that may threaten his power. The wise men left, but they were further guided by God to the place where they would find Jesus in verse 9. And when they found him, they were filled with great joy. They knew that a divine hand had led them to meet this new young king. Jesus was likely around 2 years old when he was visited by these wise travelers. Joseph does not seem to have been present in the moment when they came to Jesus and fell down at the feet of the child in worship. They had reached the end of their quest. They gifted the child with gold and spices, all of which were valuable and would sustain the family later in Egypt, where they were forced to flee Herod. The wise men were warned by God not to report to Herod and to take another route home. Here we see the first act of divine protection, which was to protect these men from Herod's wrath. These special men are never found again in Holy Scripture. In verse 13, we see that after the wise men left, Joseph was visited by an angel of God, instructing him to quickly leave, take the child and his mother into Egypt. He was told to go and stay there until he would be contacted again for a safe return. We see that Joseph made no hesitation to obey the divine command. He immediately did as instructed. And this was a trip of about 200 miles and was a very arduous journey. Now, by the simple and devout faith of Joseph, the plan of God for divine protection unfolded. Here a moment of great revelation is found even while Jesus was a small child. He would be taken into Egypt for his safety, and he would return to continue life toward manhood in Israel, where he would minister as our Messiah. Just as Moses had led the Hebrew nation out of Egypt under the command of God, Jesus would lead the same land, and he would become our Moses. He would become our Passover lamb. He would become our deliverer. Just as Moses saved his own people by the blood on the doorposts, all believers from this moment Jesus went to Egypt forward are delivered from the captivity of sin by his blood on the cross, which is our doorpost into salvation. We see Paul giving us this information in Galatians 3:14 and 16. Now, as soon as Herod knew that the wise men had left without returning to him, he put his awful plan into implementation. The time is called the slaughter of the innocents. He slew all the children who were 2 years old or younger in Bethlehem and the surrounding towns. His effort was to kill the Christ child before he could become a threat. In verse 17, Matthew makes a reference to the Old Testament prophecy of Jeremiah 31:15, where we are told that the prophet said that he saw with his own eyes Rachel rise from the dead to weep over those who were killed. Once more, we see the Old Testament prophecy fulfilled exactly as written centuries before. Matthew tells us nothing about the journey into Egypt or how much time was spent there, but it does seem that the gifts of the wise men were of much value, and that their gifts allowed the family to be sustained while living there awaiting the death of Herod. And in the spring of 4 BC, Joseph received the new command from the angel to return with Mary and the child, as those who had sought to kill Jesus were themselves dead. Herod died from a horrid disease of great pain. He had received his justice from the Lord. The kingdom of Herod was then split among his surviving sons. Joseph was led by God again to complete the return, and seemed to be led by God not to resettle in Bethlehem, but rather to live in Nazareth in Galilee. Most of the later ministry of Jesus would focus on this very area around the Sea of Galilee. We see more than a few examples of the divine protection given by God for the small family of Jesus. None of these things are coincidences. God was working out his great plan, assuring that all the prophecies given long ago were all honored and were all fulfilled. We see that the wise men who came to see Jesus asked nothing in return from this new king. They came simply to worship and give of their gifts, expecting nothing in return. This is what the Bible later describes for us as agape love. Here is a simple lesson for each of us. as we ourselves worship. We should ask what we should give to the Lord, not what he might give to us. Here in these verses, divine will was in direct spiritual conflict with spiritual darkness. This episode was war with the spirit of darkness in high places, exactly as Paul taught us in his letter to the church at Ephesus. Joseph and Mary and the Christ child were under divine protection throughout this stop on our study journey. We will see God's will is more powerful than anything else. He has told each of us that he will never leave us or forsake us once we are his. After salvation, we are under his divine hand. Next week, we will see Jesus presented as a king. I hope to see you here.